In 1975, when I was 7 years old, my mother read a book out loud to me, a bestseller at the time, Survive the Savage Sea. It was the true story of a family of farmers who decided to buy a sailboat and spend several years sailing around the world. Dougal Robertson, the father, had spent 12 years in the Merchant Navy. Lynn Robertson, the mother, was a nurse and midwife. Their hope was that their teenage kids Anne and Douglas, and twin boys Neil and Sandy, would encounter a world larger than the small rural corner of England where they were growing up. So the Robertsons sold their farm and put all the money they had into a sailboat. Lucette was a 50-year-old, 43-foot schooner, sturdy, built with grown oak frames. There's a memoir written by a previous owner, Fair Winds in the Far Baltic. The introduction warns the reader, you must not hope for any perfervid relations of dreadful happenings on the deep. As it turned out, that part of Lucette's story would be up to the Robertsons to write. Apart from Dougal, none of the Robertsons had any experience at sea when they started their trip in the winter of 1971, sailing straight into a storm in the Bay of Biscay. By the time they arrived on the other side of the Atlantic, a month later, they were seasoned sailors. After a year in Miami in the Caribbean, they were ready for the next big leg of their trip. Anne had fallen in love and decided to stay behind, so they took on a passenger, Robin Williams, a recent college graduate who joined the Robertsons for the journey across the Pacific. After 2 weeks exploring the Galapagos Islands, they began their Pacific Ocean crossing. On the morning of June 15th, 1972, they were 200 miles west of the Galapagos when something unimaginable happened. A pod of orca smashed the hull of Lucette. She sank in about a minute. The family scrambled into an inflatable life raft while Douglas cut loose their 9-foot fiberglass dinghy, Edna Mare, named for Lynn's two sisters, Edna and Mary, who had given the Robertsons some cash towards a new dinghy after seeing the sorry state of the old one. At the end of the first week, they saw a ship that didn't see them. It was devastating. They would no longer count on any help. As Dougal said, if rescue happened, it would merely be a welcome interruption of the survival voyage. They headed north to the doldrums where they hoped it would rain. With a homemade gaff, a couple of fishhooks, and a broken kitchen knife, they caught sea turtles and dorado and the occasional flying fish that landed on them. For the first 17 days, they lived in the raft until it became too leaky and waterlogged to stay afloat. They had to move to the much smaller Edna Mare, where there was no shelter from sun or storms, and with everyone aboard, only 6 inches of the boat remained above the waterline. On July 22nd, their 38th day adrift, they felt they had stocked up enough food and water for the strenuous task of rowing to the coast of Central America. But then, rescue did happen. A Japanese tuna fishing boat, the Tokomaru, spotted them and picked them up. They were saved. Based on the logbook he kept while adrift, Dougal Robertson wrote Survive the Savage Sea the following year. In 2011, I made a trip to the National Maritime Museum of Cornwall in England to see the Edna Mare. As the boat collection manager showed me artifacts from the Robertsons' ordeal, I realized I was finishing his sentences for him. This is the turtle oil the Robertsons collected in a rum bottle, he would say, which they used on their saltwater boils, I would continue, and to calm the water on the side of the dinghy when they were rescued on the 38th day. In spring of 2020, I did what I had been wanting to do for a very long time. I wrote a letter to Douglas Robertson, the oldest son. After his parents died, Douglas had written his own book, The Last Voyage of the Lucette. This included unpublished material about the family's travels and also accounts of 2 more shipwrecks: his father's during World War II, and Douglas's on the tanker he was working on in 1975. The last voyage of the Lucette also contained a revised version of Survive the Savage Sea, with amendments and additions to his father's book where Douglas felt there was more to it. Douglas answered my email and we got on the phone. He was now an accountant, 66 years old, and living in a London suburb. I explained that I was an artist, and starting on June 15th, the day they were shipwrecked in 1972, I would be working on a project which would engage every day of their time adrift until July 22nd, the day of their rescue. Would Douglas possibly consider speaking with me a few times during these weeks? "We really should speak every day," he said. "No one's ever done that before. That's what we need to do." A few days into our daily conversation, Douglas spontaneously began reading aloud to me. And so, 45 years later, this story was read out loud to me again.